There's an incredible amount of bombers to choose from in War Thunder. You can play everything from dive bombers to frontline bombers to long-range bombers. There's a lot of difference when it comes to nations and their bomber aircraft in War Thunder. Nations like the United States and Britain have a lot of long-range bombers, while countries like Japan and Germany mostly have frontline bombers. And all these bomber aircraft and many more are available to play in War Thunder. In this guide I will try to cover as many topics as I can when it comes to bomber aircraft. I will cover spinning out a bomber, talk about the defensive armaments, the bombs themselves, and different ways to use the bomber aircraft. There's a couple of controller options that will greatly increase your effectiveness with gunners and also while you're bombing, especially in something like Round RB. So let's try to get this one airborne first. Now the reason I'm using this one, Japanese light bomber or dive bomber, is that it has the bomber view and it only has one gunner. So first, whenever you look in the gunner view, you are presented with this. You see the gunner as if you were the gunner basically. The advantage is of course that you're pretty precise like this because you're zoomed in. And the disadvantage is you have very poor situational awareness. I mean, you can pretty much see what he sees and you have no idea what's going on around you, only behind you. A way to fix this is that you're going to hit Escape, Options, Air Battle Settings, and then this line, Camera from Aircraft Gunner Side. Set it to No, go back to the game again. And then you're presented with this view instead. So this is way more like a big bomber view, where you have a much more situational awareness. Now the disadvantage is that you are not as precise since you zoomed out more from the gun review. So there's pros and cons. Now for the biggest change. See, normally whenever you're going into the default bomber view, you can change directions basically, but the vertical aspect will be taken over by the game in form of an autopilot, so you don't have to worry about that. Now the bad thing is that, let's say you are in Ground RB and really want to go revenge kill the tank that just killed you, but you really lack control like this. So in order to fix this, you can go to Escape, Option, Air Battle Setting, and then this line, Autopilot for gunner and bomb side modes. And that one actually has two effects. Let me just do the bomber version first. Now if you go to the bomber view now, you have full control over the plane with the mouse movements. That means you can dive, or you can climb, and you can go left, you can go right. The only thing you need to get used to while flying like this is because of the camera, how it looks down. It looks forward and it also looks down at an angle. So it can be a little disorientating. But of course the positive thing is that you can have full control over the plane. So you can do some very precise bombing. And there's a much bigger chance that you'll survive or can avoid something. Just aiming for that tower, see if I'm actually hitting the thing. That's pretty good. Okay, let me just go put it back on again. Disable it. Now, if you go back to the gunner view, normally whenever you're in the gunner view, the plane also auto levels. And that's nice if you're, being chased by somebody who doesn't know what he's doing, because you're going to be sitting duck like this. It's going to be easier, of course, for you as a gunner, since the plane is not going to do anything and everything will be in a horizontal plane and pretty and nice. But it's also a dead giveaway that you switch to gunner view, since your plane just magically leveled out and flying straight and even. Now in order to fix this again, Options, Air Battle Setting, Autopilot for gunner and bomb side, put it to No. That way you have full control. Let's see you want to go to a steep, I was about to say, dive. Want to go up in the plane, and this way you still have full control over the gunner while you're actually either diving or climbing. You can also use it in a dive or in a slide turn. Sometimes whenever you're turning, the plane has a tendency to want to level up because of the instructor, like this, but you can still do the dive, and you can do some pretty radical movement like this. So it would look like you're controlling the plane, but in actuality you're in the gunner view. And this will greatly increase your chance of survival, because it will throw out the chasing plane some. So those two settings, especially if you play ground being a bomber, light bomber, make sure you set the autopilot to off. Now the gunner view is kind of a personal preference, so whatever floats your boat. Every time you are presented with a new plane and just bought one, you need to spade it. And usually the very first bomb blows consist of a great number of very small bombs. Now, usually if you're bombing a base, you would have to hit that space bar like a madman in order to release those 15 or 20 bombs you need to actually kill that base. And sometimes you only have a few seconds to actually make the bombs hit the target, depending on the altitude and speed you're flying in. Now there's a way you can quickly release those bombs, and you can do that with a key. So hit escape, go to controls, weaponry, and find the line that says drop bomb series. So in my opinion, I've used a half key. Now what that does is it will pretty much drop all your bombs very fast. So instead of doing like this, you pretty much just hold down the key and this happens instead. And this is a great help if you really want to do some carpet bombing. It's much more efficient. And that way you can pretty much land all your smaller bombs on the target at once. So, crew skill for a bomber crew. What is important? I'm going to try to show you what I would do if I were to play China. But I don't want to play China, and I have not really any intention of doing so. As you can see, I haven't even started anything. But this gives me an opportunity to show you something on a brand new and empty crew. Now, whenever you would spade a crew as a fighter pilot, most people start out with G tolerance for a very good reason, right? Because nobody wants to get a blackout or red out while you're maneuvering. It's deeply annoying, and it's one of the biggest reasons I got killed in the beginning anyhow. So G tolerance and stamina, they go hand in hand. Stamina, it kind of it increases the recovery rate if you get blacked out. But in a bomb aircraft, how many times do you pull a lot of Gs if you're flying a B-17? Never. And if you do, it's because you shut up and are on the way down towards the ground anyhow, so who cares? So what I would do is dump all of my points on the pilot side in vitality first. So you get up to 300% more chance or more survivability, which means that in the end, I guess you can take a 50 caliber bullet to your face and survive it, which is pretty damn good. After that, I would probably put points into keen vision and awareness, kind of 50-50. When you talk about defense armament, same thing again. G tolerance and stamina go hand in hand, but you're never doing that kind of maneuvers in a bomber aircraft. And when I'm talking about bombers, I'm talking about, the medium or frontline bombers and heavy bombers. But in general, whenever I refer to thing as a bomber, It's usually whenever it has access to the bomber vertical. Again, what I would do is dump everything in Vitality, because how many times have you tried whenever you get chased by a plane and you are going to switch to the gunner crew just to find out that he has either been killed or wounded, or in any case he's been incapacitated, so you can't even use him. So you're shit out of luck with no options to defend yourself. So Vitality on both pilot and defensive armaments is the very most important thing, in my opinion anyhow. If you look at something like fire accuracy, that also is kind of almost useless, but in a very few instances. If you look at it, the firing range, right, standard without any points put in, the AI gunners open up on baddies on 160 meters and not before then, and topped out at 210 meters, and that's like ridiculous, because everybody starts out at, depending on what you're using, if it's the 50 caliber, you start out at a kilometer even further away. You having to wait until gunners open up until they are 160 meters away, that's just a death sentence. I would say the only reason it's actually useful if when you are playing ground RB and you are fighting or looking out for, other aircraft, or you're looking out for SPADs who wants to gun you out of the sky. In that case, you can easily get that close with a baddie on your tail, because also the maps are so small and everything is so bunched up together. So in that case, having something like firing accuracy and just at least one experienced gunner maxed out can be useful actually. And the last thing I would consider upgrading is the qualifications. Now I know it's not points and it's not free, you do have to spend silver lines, but usually you have one favorite bomber or fighter in your BR lineups. So it's worth spending some love and throw some silver lines after it. It does help out a lot, and as you can see, +3 even for the cheapest upgrade, it's actually a pretty big help. So let me try to show you how I spade a plane. Now this Italian P108 is the same plane I used for the intro video, and I'm not done spading it yet, so let's take a look. The short version is to weaponry, then survivability, then bombs, and then the flight performance bit. And I'll give you my reasoning why. In this particular instance, the P108 starts at 4,500 meters because it's a long-range bomber. So I would argue that in itself is that a defensive capability already. And starting out that high, that early in the game, because it's only 3.3, means that it's going to take a while before the enemy fighters gets up to you. So you can definitely wait with the engine controls. Well, that's my reason anyhow. Okay, so weaponry. The first time you get your first upgrade, you're going to get access to the different kinds of builds there is. And that also means you get access to that lovely universal build, which contains the armor-piercing incendiary tracer. And that's the build you want to use, and only you want to use that one. The next upgrade is always the weapon overheating, so it doesn't jam as often, and then the spread of the gun, so you're more accurate further out. And then it just kind of duplicates again for the other turrets or the other caliber weapons. Talking about survivability, you have two options. You have airframe and you have cover. If you look at airframe first and then look at the first green line, plus 10% to overall construction strength. Now construction strength, I read that as in basically hit points. So we have 10% more hit points, 10% more chance of survival, not 10% more chance of survival. You take 10% more damage before you are taken down. And if you look at the cover, first line, 5% more overall constructional strength. So between those two, you get 15% more in quotation hit points. So definitely do that. When you're talking about bombs, normally, not always, but normally even a standard bomb load is not enough to kill an entire base. Sometimes you only kill about half a base, and that is extremely annoying. So definitely get at least the first upgrade going. With that, you can kill one base in one go without having to return to base to rearm. And then from that on, the second and the third is usually enough to kill at least one more base. Or you can start carpet bombing or select bombing some ground targets. So weaponry, survivability, and bomb load. Between the different nations, you usually have three kinds of weapon types. We have the rifle caliber weapons, you have the heavy machine guns, and you have the cannons. So the rifle caliber is usually 7.7 or 7.9 millimeter machine guns. Then you have the heavy machine guns, which are usually American 12.7 millimeters, or for instance German 13 millimeters machine guns. And lastly, a select few nations have access to 20 millimeter cannons. Bomber aircraft like the American B-17 has a bunch of turrets, and usually they cover pretty much all angles of attack. If you take a country like Germany for instance though, that one has a lot of medium bombers, and the problem with that is that it usually has much lighter defensive armaments, and usually they are all facing rearwards. So in a German bomber you are much more vulnerable compared to an American one for instance. And you are vulnerable to being attacked from a lot of angles that would be covered by American bomber aircraft's defensive turrets. When we talk about turrets, let's start off with the rifle caliber ones. They usually go from 7.7 to 7.92 like this German one. Now the German one has the strongest armor penetration of all the rifle caliber ones with 30 millimeters, and if you look at the Great Britain one, that has armor penetration of 10 millimeters, at 10 meters that is. They both drop off to 7 millimeters at 500 meters. Usually you get three different kinds of ammo types. You get the regular ball, then you get the armor piercing ones, of course you also get the tracer ones, and then you get the best one, the armor piercing incendiary bullet. Now I think every nation at the rifle caliber level has access to armor piercing incendiary tracer. So once you get the last build unlocked, which is called universal, always pick that one. You have the armor penetration of the armor target ones, plus you have the chance with the incendiary part to set the plane on fire. Now when we're talking about weapon conversions, I would not set it further out than maybe 300 or 400 meters tops. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fire the rifle caliber turrets against targets that are further out than 400 or 500 meters. I'm just saying that you may land a hit and scare them off for a little while, but your weapons won't be tremendously effective. Let's talk about heavy machine guns. So Germany has access to a 13 millimeter gun, and that is inferior to the American 12.7 millimeter in every way pretty much. The German one only has access to two different kinds of bells, and if you look at the first one, starts out with an incendiary tracer bullet, then comes the one we really want, the armor piercing incendiary tracer bullet, and then we have an immediate action incendiary bullet. Now immediate action means that as soon as the bullet hits something, it makes a pretty sparkle, and that's about it. It's more for marking a target than anything else, and you would have to have a fuel leak on the plane you are attacking in order for it to actually set it on fire. The other build is called armor targets, and that one has armor piercing incendiary. Sorry, it does not have armor piercing incendiary. It only has armor piercing tracer bullets, and then it has immediate action incendiary bullet. So it doesn't have the capability to penetrate the plane and then set it on fire. And that's what we want. If you look at the armor penetration itself, at 10 meters it's 80 millimeters, and it drops off to 6 millimeters at 500 meters. If you compare that to the rifle caliber one, that also has only 7 millimeters at 500 meters. So even though it's twice the caliber, at 500 meters it's just as weak as a rifle caliber one, and that is pretty bad. And since you can set two gun conversions, you need to set this one also at 300 or 400 meters, and that's just fine, because further out it's not going to do a whole lot of damage. The most commonly used heavy machine gun in the game is probably the American 12.7mm. And we're just going to look at the last build, which is called Universal. That's what we want, with the armor piercing incendiary tracer bullet. Now that one has an armor penetration of 23 millimeters at 10 meters, dropping off to 16 millimeters at 500 meters. So at 500 meters it's still twice as effective, rather has twice the armor penetration than the German 13 millimeters. And that's a huge difference. That also means that when we're talking about gun conversions, you can easily set this one out to pretty much maximum, which is 800 meters. At that range, it still penetrates about 12 millimeters of armor. And that also means that you can start scaring away German or Japanese or Italian aircraft at a much further range than you could with the German one. And you can actually hit and do significant damage to them at a much further range. Another reason is the increased bullet weight of the heavy machine gun bullets, which also means that the bullet trajectory is much flatter compared to the 7.62 ones, which again means that it's much easier to hit targets much further out. Attacking American bombers even from over a kilometer away is actually pretty scary, so when you see this hail of tracer fire coming towards you, you do really want to avoid it, because even at that range you can be killed from these pretty effective guns. Now the most lethal heavy machine gun in the game is the Russian one. Try to look at the armored targets built and try to look at 1500 meters and 2000 meters. You can still penetrate 12 millimeters of armor, and that is with the armor piercing incendiary bullet with a cement core. Now if you compare that to the American heavy machine gun, at 1500 meters armor penetration is 0. Now the only thing is, of course, is that at 1500 meters, at 2000 meters, hitting an aircraft attacking you is probably almost impossible. He would pretty much have to not move and attack you from a fixed angle, like directly from the rear chasing you. And then you can hope and land a hit or two. But I would say if you hit something at 2 kilometers away, I would definitely be discouraged trying to get even closer to you. The biggest downside with the Russian heavy machine gun is the lack of ammo. Usually it has much less ammo than the American counterpart. So if you start attacking anything at around 1500 meters, once you get much closer you probably spend half of your ammo just doing that. And when it really counts, you're either reloading or you're running very low or are already out of ammunition. When we're talking about cannons on planes, it's strange enough the Japanese who are in forefront. Already at BR 2.7 you get access to a 20mm turret. And here we're looking at the most desirable one, that's the air target ammunition. As you can see, the armor penetration is pretty much non-existent, but it doesn't matter, since that once the shell hits a plane, it explodes and sends fragments everywhere, and that's completely and devastating and deadly. Now the downside of the Japanese cannons is that they're usually very low in ammunition. This one being an exception, with 1000 rounds of 20mm cannons. Usually it's like this one, only 180 rounds, and that's not a whole lot of ammo, so you need to be sure or need to be a good gunner in order to make this one effective. On the other hand, you need very few hits in order to take a plane down chasing you with this cannon. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have this German BV238. This one has 1400 rounds of 20mm cannon ammunition. Not even talking about the 18,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition it has. It's completely insane. But it's the same deal with the 20mm cannon. Hardly any penetration for the high explosive incendiary tracer shell, but a lot of fragments are going to be flung around. And if you've ever been behind one of these guys and attacking it, you know how it looks when all these turrets go ape on you from over a kilometer away. It's not a good place to be. And a very few hits with a 20mm cannon and you are out of the game. The biggest mystery in War Thunder goes something like this. How many tons of bombs do you need to kill a base? And if you ask in chat, it goes something like this. There's a player called armaments on the official War Thunder forum. Now he is the main author of an exceptionally useful Google Spreadsheet, and I will link it in the description below. And everything I have from now on, all the information is pretty much from that spreadsheet. So none of the credit can go to me, and everything should go to him. And I will share these information since they are very useful. So do yourself a favor and take a look at the spreadsheet, or you can always just copy it and download it as a PDF just to make sure you have some sort of a documentation for yourself. So the most important thing to understand here is that the tonnage needed to kill a base is not constant. And another thing is that it is not the weight of the bomb itself, but the amount of TNT that the bomb has that determines how many bombs is needed to kill a base at a given bracket. I will also mention that it's sometimes useful to take a look at your teammates and to figure out who has the highest BR of any of the bombers or any aircraft, because it is the highest BR of any player that determines how many tons of TNT is needed in order to kill a base in your match. So for instance, if you take a bomber like the Challenger P08, which I showed you how to spade earlier. Now that one can either carry 34 50 kilograms or 34 100 kilogram bombs for the very first two options. Now if I were at 3.3 but the highest player would be at 4.3, that would mean that I would need several bombs more in order to kill a base than I would initially have thought if it would have been at my current BR. So do yourself a favor and grab the spreadsheet. It does not only talk about bombs, you can also see what kind of bomb each nation has, how much TNT there is in each bomb. It talks about the different rockets types. It talks about guns from rifle caliber to heavy machine guns, and even cannons are mentioned here. It talks about how much they can penetrate, how fast they shoot, how fast they overheat, and so on and so forth. So definitely go grab it. It's a treasure trove of information. This German Dornier 217 is one of the best medium bombers for ground RB. It can carry a massive 4,000 kilograms or 8,000 pounds of bombs. So you can have 3 bomb drops, and the very first one consists of 2 1,000 kilogram bombs, and each of them has 600 kilograms worth of TNT with a killer radius of 21 meters for ground vehicles. So the chances that you'll kill at least one vehicle with this is very high. You just need to hit in the general area. Whenever you use a medium bomber for ground B, there's a couple of things that you should remember. Firstly, don't be afraid to actually use the capabilities of the bomber, so you can easily be up to a kilometer in height above the target and still be able to see and kill a tank. There's absolutely no reason to be 10 meters above the ground when you are in a medium bomber. It will also increase your survivability by a lot. You have to remember that you are a pretty big and slow target, so why give an enemy SPAG or fighter an easy kill? You might as well use the options that you are given. A typical match has like a rhythm to it. Even after a minute or two you'll already see some enemy fighter planes or some of your own, but I would wait the spawning in your bomber. So sit tight and wait until the second wave of friendly fighters are up. That way enemy fighters and SPAGs will be preoccupied with your own fighters, and hopefully you have some peace and quiet to do your bombing runs. In this last clip I'm using an American B-25 frontline bomber. Now the bomb load capability of this bomber is much worse than the German one, but on the other hand it has many more defensive armaments and it's way more survivable when it comes to that. The downside is the very light bombing load. The heaviest bomb load it can carry is 3 1,000 pound bombs, and all 3 bombs combined only has slightly more TNT in it than a single German 1,000 kilogram bomb. So the chances are high that you're not going to be able to kill as many vehicles as you would with the German one. You have the same amount of bomb drops, but much less TNT to score some kills. But as you can see, I'm 700 meters up when I release the bombs, and still I have no issues of killing a ground vehicle. I know it's an SPAG, but still, everything counts. A big plus on the American bomber is the heavy armament it has. So you really have 5 4x5 and heavy machine guns. It has something the German ones can say it has. It has a single 20mm cannon with much less ammunition. So after you drop your bombs, you can easily go back and start strafing or play gunship, and that way score more kills, or at the very least mark some tanks for your teammates. So do yourself and your team a favor and add a frontline bomber to your RB lineups. It's great fun, a little different gameplay, and it will give you and your team a better chance of winning. Whenever you find yourself in a long-range bomber in ARB, sometimes it can get a little boring just to sit up high and just to kill a couple of bases and pretty much just wait until you are getting hunted down. Sometimes I like to pretty much just dive right out of the sky and go low and find a quiet corner on the map and doing some bomb runs on some targets I can find, maybe a tank column or the odd base or other installations. I've been looking around, but I have not been able to find a list showing how much silver line you actually get for each different kind of ground targets that you can kill in the game. I can clearly see though that a AAA vehicle is much less worth than say a bunker or a medium or heavy tank. So you basically have to wait and see whenever you get the score screen how much you've earned. In general, definitely prioritize tank and pillboxes and bases over lighter vehicles. Usually they're not worth it and you need to kill a lot of them in order to make up for even the bombs you're using. There's also a pretty big difference in what kind of vehicle you're using to kill the ground targets with. If you look at the bomber I'm using right now, for instance, look at the very bottom line of the stat sheet. So each target gives you 350% more silver lines than you would normally. And some other vehicles are much less and some are slightly higher. It's just very different. And as you can see, if you lose the vehicle it will cost you 8,349 silver lines. So if you want to actually earn silver lines by bombing, make sure you prioritize the targets. There's another reason for sometimes it's not a bad idea to do low-level bombing. And not only just bombing random targets, but also if you want to go after the bases. On the crew skills, in the pilot, you find an ability called keen vision. Try look at the look down detection range. Now, most players actually wait with spading keen vision because it's one of the more lesser useful ones. And if you look at that line I talked about, unspaded, you cannot even detect a plane that's a kilometer below you. And the maximum detection range, once spaded, is not even 2 kilometers. So if you right off the bat start diving and pretty much go nab of the earth for bombing runs, there's a pretty big chance that you will never be detected by the fighters who are going to be above you trying to look for you. So what you end up having to worry about are the ground attackers and fighters who are going to go kill your ground attackers. Because of course, depending on the maps and depending on how many ground targets there is, people often do that. Another thing that can increase your survivability is to side climb. That means pretty much instead of going straight for the target, go way off the beaten path, so to speak. So start side climbing and maybe get up to 6,000 or 7,000 meters. Most players won't even bother to go up there. So turn away from the center of the map, place your bomber aircraft in a 10-degree climb. After that you can go make a cup of coffee, make a sandwich, yell at your imaginary girlfriend, or play with your pet. When you return to the computer, or controller for that matter, you'll find out that hopefully you've reached your desired altitude or you've been shot down. Either way, you're good to go. And with this mediocre score screen, I might as well end this little guide. I hope you got something out of it. I know I did, and had a lot of fun making the video. So until next time, have a good one.